Hello, everyone. Welcome. Going to kick things off in a couple minutes here. Just let everyone funnel in. Curious to know where you're all joining from today. What city, what clinic? Feel free to drop it in the chat there. There's two options to communicate, the chat and the Q&A. We're going to be using the chat option for this webinar. Portland, Oregon, Guardian Vet Care, welcome. Vancouver,
Look at that.
hello.
I live in Vancouver, right across the river from Portland. See you guys on here.
Cape Cod, we got our friends from Hefner Road Animal Hospital in OKC. Dr. Martin, welcome. April Vets, New Brunswick, Michigan, Arlington. Awesome, good spread. New Jersey. Welcome, Adam.
BC. Nice.
I
Awesome.
love seeing all the familiar faces.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or names, I guess.
And feel free to drop any questions or things that are top of mind in the chat as well. We will try to get to all of those topics today as I hand over to Nicole and Emmett. Um, yeah, feel free to openly communicate in the chat there. Okay. I'll go ahead and kick things off. Nice to see all of you, and thank you again for joining us today. I'm Mike Rogers. I'm the head of marketing at Digitail, and at Digitail, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to help you save time, cut down on a lot of the manual work that's part of your day to day, and get more done with fewer resources and less stress. So a lot of that lends itself really nicely to today's topic, which is inventory and inventory management. For many of you, inventory is the second largest expense item on your profit and loss statement, and how you manage it can obviously have significant implications for your margins as well as your overall ease of working as you wrap up the year. So that's why we teamed up with Inventory Ally to bring you something practical and hopefully actionable at the end of this hour. Nicole and Emmett are going to walk through a step-by-step plan to cut some of that chaos and bring more organization to your year end. So I'm excited to introduce our experts. We have two of the best in the business when it comes to all things inventory. We have Nicole Clausen, who has nearly 20 years of veterinary experience, including over a decade in small animal practice. She's also the founder of Veterinary Care Logistics, where she helps practices across the country build smarter, more sustainable inventory systems. And Nicole's also the creator of the first ever certified veterinary inventory professional program. You might recognize her voice from the podcast Inventory Nation. And she's also the author of Inventory Management for Veterinary Professionals. So, very difficult to find someone more credentialed and relevant to be speaking to inventory management today. But she's got an excellent partner in Emmett Nance, who has spent the past 2 decades optimizing hospital operations, first starting as a practice manager and then moving on to leading operations at SmartFlow and Galaxy Vets. Today, Emmett channels a lot of his passion into Inventory Ally, which you'll hear a ton more about in a second. And they're collectively on a mission to make this time of the year and inventory in general a lot less stressful. So I'll hand off to Nicole in 1 second. There's one final piece of housekeeping that I'll share at the start. This is an approved 1 hour race session and CVPM CE credit. So I'll make sure to send those certificates out after the webinar to the email that you registered with. So with that, I will hand over to Nicole, and thank you all for joining us again.
Thanks so much, Mike. Welcome, everybody. We are so excited and glad that you're here. So thank you so much for tuning in. As Mike mentioned, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. If you haven't heard us speak before, Emmett and I run a no questions left behind session. So we love all the questions, love all the comments. So yeah, thanks so much for tuning in and spending part of your day with us. So without further ado, hand it over to Emmett.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks everybody for being here. We're very excited to be able to help out. As Mike had mentioned, we're really passionate when it comes to inventory. That can be hard to find, but we are your partners when it comes to inventory management. As we mentioned, it's the second largest expense. It creates often a lot of time and energy that kind of gets sucked away from taking care of clients and patients. We want to make sure that it's done well, but also done efficiently so that you have what you need without having too much. You have good performance in your financials, but ideally you get a lot of time and energy back into caring for clients and patients. So that's what we're all about. Conversation today is going to focus a little bit more specifically on the end of year, but also some ways that you can lean into next year. So doing those end of year counts, getting yourself set up for next year, some best practices, and really hoping you get 2026 off on the right foot as well. So looking to dive in here. Thanks for joining us today. All right, let's see here. So quick look at the agenda. Today we're going to cover inventory on hand. Does lead into that end of year accounts, but calculating that, what's it look like? How do we measure it? Getting some baseline there. Looking at ways we could start to improve it, like formulary redundancy, product overstock, optimizing cost of carry, and then looking to kind of lean in towards how can we keep that efficient, keep it working well as we go into 2026. We're going to talk about cycle counts, the best ways to tackle that, set those up so that it's easy to use and you get good outcomes there. And then really coming back to that end of year counts. So we know what we have, how we're going to take it forward, any cleanup and necessary projects that we have. This is a great time of year to put a little bit of time aside when it may be a little bit slower as far as volume through the clinic. Let's get ourselves organized, get ourselves cleaned up, and really off on that right foot. So we're going to touch on some of that today as well. All right, so let's start with value of inventory on hand. Pretty straightforward, seems to make sense, but let's make sure we dig a little bit deeper and understand just what we're talking about. Everybody's on the same page and why this is important. So inventory carrier, the value of the inventory on hand is the value of the inventory in your hospital. Think of all those, I love Nicole says this a lot. Think of all those bottles on the shelf as having little dollar bills in them and sum all that up. Right? There's a lot of money and value sitting there on the shelves. What's that add up to? And where's it reflected? It's actually on the balance sheet as an asset. So it's an asset that's in the hospital. It converts as you use it. Right. So the value of inventory on hand is the cost of everything there. Why is it important? Really important when you put it into practical terms like this. Let's take a $1.8 million practice as an example. They're doing about $150,000 a month in revenue as an average. If they have $60,000 of inventory on hand, that's measured as about 40% of that monthly revenue. At $60,000 is the value of all the inventory on the shelf. But if we can move that to $30,000, that's about 20% of that monthly revenue, which is a target that we'll start to talk about here in a few minutes. But think about that $30,000 that was sitting on the shelf that's now freed up. What could you do with that? That's one of those anchors that we're going to talk through a little bit more today is what could you do with the value that's otherwise just sitting there? Okay. Well, first, why is this important? If you were able to make that shift and you pulled that $30,000 off the shelf, one that's actually going to convert to equity, so value of the business. It's also going to reduce that space that's being consumed. So if you have a cluttered hospital and there's a lot of stuff taking up space, reducing that not only puts cash back in the pocket and improves balance sheet equity, but it gives you space, right? Less clutter, more organization, more predictability in your hospital. What we very consistently find too is when you reduce the excess in the hospital, you also see a reduction in shrink. And shrink is anything that you have bought, but you haven't actually been able to generate revenue for. That might be expiration. It could be breakage. It could be discounts and giveaways. It could be theft. Lots of different things that go into shrink that's strongly correlated with having too much inventory. And we're going to then free up cash for other investments, right? So taking that $30,000 and applying it to something, think equipment, salaries, facility improvements, different things to that effect. Okay? So a lot of positive that could come out of cleaning up the inventory and reducing that cost of carry. It's something we have to keep in mind as we think about this. There's opposing forces in what we're trying to achieve. We set it up this way. If you have, when we focus on client and patient care, the goal with inventory would be to make sure you have everything you need at your fingertips at all times. And so the motivation there is to have excess, to make sure you don't run out. You always have everything you need. But the opposing force there is the profitability and the success of the business. And so if you maximized that side of the equation, you'd have very, very little inventory. It'd be okay to run out as long as you're not spending the money and wasting any money. But you can't do that either. So it's always going to be balanced here and working to find that balance. So what we're really going to focus on is optimizing your inventory. Optimizing it means making sure you have enough to care for your patients without having so much that you're causing waste. We're going to find that balance, and that's optimization. That's just the perfect spot there. All right. Now, when we're talking about optimizing your inventory and reducing the excess on the shelf, it's really important to have a bit of a benchmark so you don't overshoot, overcorrect. We like to look at a couple of different metrics. One is this inventory to revenue ratio. And it's what I presented on that last couple of pages ago. If you take the total value of inventory on the shelf and you compare it to the average revenue you're generating in a month. So we showed $150,000 a month in revenue to $60,000 of inventory. That was about 40%. Our goal is generally going to be closer to 20%. And this is how you calculate that. Total inventory divided by average monthly revenue times 100 gives you that percentage. And that gives you a real strong understanding of where you're at. And it gives us the ability to benchmark that. The other way to look at this is based on your full-time equivalent doctors, right? So that total inventory of on hand, that's 60,000, and divided by the number of FTEs, so full-time equivalent veterinarians. So what are we shooting for when we talk about benchmarks? We're looking to take that, but we have to make sure that we're appropriately setting goals to the type of business that you are. We say that with relativity to general small animal, ER specialty, or large and mixed animal. And the reason for that is that the mix of revenue is a real key component of this calculation. When you're a small GP hospital, you have a bit of a mix of services that generate revenue and goods sold that generate revenue. ER specialty hospitals comparatively have a lot more revenue that's generated from services instead of goods. Whereas large animal or mixed animal tend to have a lot more revenue generated from product sales instead of service sales. So the way that you generate revenue in your business type can actually impact this quite a bit because you need to make sure that you have the right amount of products to meet your business needs. So as far as benchmarks go, we kind of look at small animal GP, 20% of your average monthly revenue as a good target. You may be a little higher, a little bit lower based on some fluctuations, but that's a good benchmark. But if you're an ER specialty hospital, it's going to be closer to 12 to 15% of your average monthly revenue as the value of inventory on hand. Inverse of that, if we look at the large and mixed animal, you're going to be closer to that 30% target, 28 to 32%, because you have a higher dependence on product sales to generate revenue. Now, that's just a rough math of this. If you're looking at the per DVM, those are all going to kind of flush out somewhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000 of inventory on hand. Now, again, these are meant to be benchmarks. So you can say, where are you at relative to a roughed out benchmark, just to say, should I put time and effort into improving this? Or am I in a good area of performance?
And I'm
Now,
just
as we
gonna
start to,
add one
yes,
thing,
please, Nicole.
sorry.
Yes, please.
If you're, especially like this time of year, we're kind of like getting closer to the end of the year, and and I think cost of goods sold and our inventory cost is a really hot topic. And honestly, one of the biggest reasons for high cost of goods that I see is just having like such a large inventory. So if your costs are good, goods are high, look first at your value of inventory in hand and see where you are in those benchmarks. Because that's like the first thing that I do. If COGS are high, check that value of inventory in hand. So you may not kind of run this number often, but I actually like to kind of monitor it each and every month to see where I am in relation to everything. So just wanted to throw that out there really quick.
Oh, I appreciate it. And break it up there. It is important as we talked about, like an inflated inventory carry can significantly inflate shrink, which will be a direct result in your cost of goods sold as well. So it's definitely the right place to start. Now, when we start to think about improving that cost of carry, how can we reduce it? How can we move it from 60,000 to 30,000 or from 40% to 20%? Here's some of those key components that we see generally drive that inflation. Formulary redundancy is one of the first ones, right? So that's carrying a lot of products that essentially do the same thing. Flea tick and heartworm products are the easiest example to be able to talk to. Because you think about, they each of the brands generally have 4 to 6 different sizes, and so different SKUs. And if you're carrying 3 to 4 different brands of flea and tick with 3 to 4 different or 4 to 5 different SKUs each of those start to have to be carried, and they come in sleeves, and then you have to make sure that you have enough, and so you might have an extra sleeve, and they're expensive. So those are a great example of formulary redundancy, products that essentially do the same thing that are sitting on your shelf, taking up space and taking up value. What are some other things, Nicole, that you've seen that are good examples of formulary products that tend to be highly redundant? Brand versus generic, other common goods?
um like supplement lines, right? When you're like 14 different joint supplements, bathing and grooming products, right? You have like 9 different shampoo lines.
Right.
um and I think sometimes what happens is we just like, a new product comes out and we're like, ooh, this looks really great, but then we don't take one away, and so we kind of like, it grows and grows and grows and grows. Sometimes
Dana says
unintentionally.
Odix. Odix are the bane of my existence. I love that comment. Right? There's so many options and so many opportunities to make sure everybody stays happy, but we all know the saying, you can't keep everybody happy all the time, right? So look to make some decisions, offer the ones that you prefer, consolidate some of that redundancy, and you start to see improvements in your cost of carry. Product overstock's another real big contributor to excess cost of carry. Hopefully nobody's stock rooms look like those pictures on the right, but I've seen a couple exam room floors full of food that start to rival this a little bit. So think about those areas of your hospital that seem a little cluttered. Um, Other examples are like, if somebody says, "Hey, I need some an Odic," and but I don't see it on the shelf. You're like, "Hold on, I've got some over here and back over there, and I've got some stuffed in the cabinet over there." Those are kind of some key indicators of product overstock. And this is where you're generally starting, you're carrying a lot that you may not need. And we'll talk about how to put those in higher rotation and fix those with cycle counts and such. But the general rule of thumb here is really you need to lean towards defining a min and a max or reorder points that's going to help you turn over that inventory and not just bulk up on the excess. Part of the reality we see in a lot of hospitals is that it's much easier to make sure you have more than you need because you don't want to run out. And there's not enough time, there's not enough predictability, things are chaotic, things are stressful. And if something runs out, we tend to over order on it to try to prevent that from happening again. If you do that across a lot of SKUs, it builds up this excess and it really creates overstock on a lot of different products in the hospital, right? But think about what you're actually using, some tools and some processes that help you start to just manage what you need on a regular cadence. It gives predictability. It starts to declutter the hospital and reduce this overstock. One last piece here, that last bullet point can be difficult. We've all been there, but making sure you can have a conversation with the doctor team about preferred products and aligning on preferred products, especially on high impact items. So that formula redundancy, as well as how much we're carrying, both play into that conversation. Use some data and lean into those conversations, but have data and have some insights that can really help guide that conversation. You'll see get some good results. So as we talk about this idea of optimizing your inventory on hand and your cost of carry, we're going to start to look at how do we increase inventory turnover. So instead of carrying a whole lot, how do we replenish it more frequently, but do so predictably so that you're not at risk of running out? We need to reduce your formulary. So consolidate those redundant SKUs, make things more predictable, and be consistent in the offerings that your hospitals have making to customers. And then set dynamic reorder points. Another key piece here. Dynamic means it self corrects. So it's not something you calculated at the beginning of the year and you set it in your PIMS and then you always refer to that. You have to be able to keep those updated based on changes in demand and not just generally. It really should be at a SKU level because the demand on a product is impacted by so many different variables. So understanding how we can get closer to reactive dynamic reorder points that keep your inventory turning over. Okay. So to do that, we're going to lean in towards creating cycle counts.
So
Cool.
cycle counting, I know you're like, oh, Nicole, the very last thing that I want to do in the entire world is count. I did not get into vet med just to count stuff. I totally get it. But I'm just gonna like take you back in time for a second and paint you a little picture. So my very first inventory job, I was brand new to the practice, brand new to inventory, and I was coming up on my first year-end count. Now, the practice had not counted anything in 9 years, not one count in 9 years. And so, as you could probably imagine, stuff was literally everywhere. Also, I'm going to pause for a second. If you have not ordered rabies tags, 2026 rabies tags, just
Cool.
stop what you're doing, make a sticky note, make it the very first thing that you do after watching this. Don't forget to order your rabies tags. Um, don't ask me how I know. Um, okay, so 9 years I hadn't counted anything. So my very first end of year count, I did it by myself. We were open. It took forever and a day. Okay, actually, it took less time than that, but it felt like forever. I had so much cleanup to do. There was like inventory stored all over the place. There was a ton of things not even in the computer. It was just like literally the biggest mess. But then the next year, as I kind of like got my feet under me, I really changed how I did end of year counts. We closed down the practice. I had other people help me. I had started kind of with this idea of cycle counts, and it went so much faster. And then by the third year, I had a full cycle count schedule. And the end of year count was literally a breeze because I had really kept my inventory accurate throughout the year. So it made end of year counts so much more manageable. So that's where we're going to talk a little bit about cycle counts because they are really valuable in a lot of different ways. And then we'll dive into some great stuff about how to make end of year accounts easier. So, Sherry, that is a really great question. What is your cycle? Quarterly, monthly, we're going to go into all sorts of that here soon. But I would love to know, do you currently cycle count in your inventory? How is it going? Let us know in the chat. Yes, it's amazing. Maybe it's a mess. You don't even want to talk about it or you don't cycle count. Just let me know in the chat. And then we go to the next line of it, and I'll just.
Nobody wants to. Nobody wants to suggest how that's going. We probably know where that sits.
So, with cycle counting, first of all, what is cycle counting? Cycle counting, Melissa said, we try. I love that,
Fair
right?
enough.
That's all we can do is try. Um, Jennifer says organized chaos. Totally get that. um, at least it's slightly organized, right? That's what we can hope for. So first of all, cycle counting is where we count small amounts of inventory frequently on a rotational basis, right? Because let's say, for example, let's say we don't cycle count, right? And we get to the end of the year and we see in the computer that it says we have negative 17,000 gabapentin, right? Like, what are we going to do with that, right? We can't go search for that or find out if any went missing or if there's theft or anything like that. We just have to make the adjustment in the computer and hope for the best. But if we cycle count, and so let's say, for example, you're counting gabapentin on a weekly or monthly basis, you're going to be able to find any missing gabapentin really quickly. And so that's kind of really where the benefit comes in for cycle counting, not only for streamlining end of year counts, but also you're able to find missed charges much more quickly. You're able to find theft much more quickly. So there's really a lot of value in that. If we think about it, right, you're probably already doing cycle counts with your controlled substances without even realizing it because you are counting those on a much more regular basis, right? I just get hives thinking about waiting a whole year to count controlled drugs and reconcile controlled drug logs. Like, can you imagine if you waited the whole year to reconcile your drug logs? It would take you the whole next year to get them accurate again. So, so that's why it can be really helpful. So there are kind of four different methods for creating a cycle count schedule. And so first you can do it by location. So you can kind of count different zones of the practice on a rotational schedule, right? Maybe you might have like treatment area, like these cabinets in the treat area on week one, these other cabinets on week two. The
All right.
downside of that is, oh, it's okay, um, is really kind of the value of cycle counting is we want to count our high value, high impact items more often. So if we're counting by location, we might be counting things that aren't as valuable to the practice more often than needs to be. So you can certainly do this, but it's not my favorite. I personally like if you're just getting started, I think by category is a really great way to get started with it because you can count different categories on a rotational schedule. So, for example, on week one, you would count all of your flea and tick and heartworm prevention. Then on week two, you could count your vaccines and expensive injectables. Then week three, you count your food. And then maybe on the fourth week, you rotate through a different category. So you make sure that you are counting your high value high impact items more frequently.
Mm.
Another
Something that
method,
these two options, I'm sorry, I was going to say
yeah,
is you can start to delegate some things really more comfortably and predictably with these two options as well. Someone's in charge of food or someone's in charge of treatment, and you can start to gain some visibility and delegation that way. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Right. If you're the practice owner, if you're the practice manager, if you're just doing a bazillion other things, right? Because we know if you're in charge of inventory, you probably have a lot of other responsibilities. It always helps to have inventory friends to help delegate things to, and cycle counts is a great thing to help delegate.
Absolutely.
Um, so the third method, I apologize. I have a great Pyrenees who loves to bark at anything, so you might hear. Um, the third method is to do it based upon an ABC analysis. If you have not heard of that before, an ABC analysis is just a method of prioritizing your items. So, for example, it breaks it down into A, B, and C class items. And our A items are the top 20% of our products that generate 80% of our revenue or usage. And so these are going to be our biggest movers and shakers. So we're going to count our A items much more frequently than our C class items, which are the bottom 50% of our products that generate only 5% of our revenue or usage, right? So cotton balls, depressors, all those good little things. We definitely don't need to count flea and tick and heart or cotton balls as often as we count flea and tick prevention. So,
Right.
and then the fourth method is based upon turnover. So if you have high turn, high value items, you should count these more frequently. And for our low turn, low value items, we can count these less frequently. So you kind of start to sense a theme here where we are really counting those items that are most impactful and important to us more often. So, whatever method you choose, the best method is however you can most be consistent, right? Because you could have like the most beautiful cycle count schedule in the whole entire world. But if it goes out the window the second that you get busy or shorthanded or anything like that, it's not actually giving us the benefit, right? Because we see the benefits of cycle counting when we go through the cycle on a regular basis. So if you're just getting started with it, it's totally fine to start small and work your way up gradually, right? Focus on a few products every day or a few products every week and just kind of get your feet under you. And then you can kind of start to, you know, grow as, you get better. And then, kind of as we mentioned, the really premise behind cycle counting is prioritizing and ranking our items based upon their value and usage. So we don't want to just, count all of our consumables and our white goods the same frequency that we count, our really important things.
But even on that getting started piece, figuring out what are those high impact items that you want to start with, you can start to get a good behavior, understand how it's valuable, and then expand to other products, right? So
Mhm.
picking those out, like
Absolutely.
those A products. Mhm.
So kind of a schedule that you can think of, right? Is our controlled substances should be counted at the very minimum at least once per week. These should really be counted as often as you need to make sure that your controlled drug logs are accurate all the time. Some practices, if you're super busy, it might be every shift, it might be every day, it might be every week. I don't like to go longer than once a week though. So then our high turn or our class A items, right, our big movers and shakers, count these once a month. And so you don't have to like wait to the end of the month and have this huge running list. You can actually break them into weekly sections or even daily sections, right? Because it's a lot easier to count, to take 5 minutes every day and count 5 products than it is to, wait to the end of the month and have a list of like 100 or 200 or more. So then our medium turn or our B class items, middle of the road cuties, are going to be counted once per quarter. And again, we can kind of break these up into, smaller sections. Then finally, our C class or our low turn items should be counted every 6 months. And these are going to be things like our lit rollers, um, just all those cute little things, gauze, syringes, all those things that we use, but they aren't necessarily, costing us $1 bazillion.
One thing I'll add to this, and maybe it's another slide, I don't recall, but what you're really trying to balance here is putting your time and effort towards the high cost, high impact items. Because there's a real key piece to the calculation that everybody tends to forget. It's the value of your time. And so if you're counting everything frequently, you're spending a lot of time on that. And some things just don't have the return on investment for finding it. That's why you do them less frequently. So it's another way to kind of look at this. What things deserve your time more often than those that don't? They're just not going to be worth the investment of time and effort, right? So think of it that way as well.
And then, so if you're counting by category or location, count your highest value categories each month on week 1 through 3, and then kind of rotate the final week of the month. And then Sherry had a question, where are the changes identified in Digitail? So that's a great question that I actually don't know the answer to, but we can certainly find that out. Um, you know, Ideally, right, your practice management system should have kind of a report that you can run to kind of see all the changes. Dana said you can look at the stock movement report. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about end of year counts. So we're going to just talk about some different best practices and things that I found that just make it go so much more smoothly. And really, the name of the game is prep work. So if you kind of prep for your end of year counts, it makes things go so much more smoothly. And so I kind of like to think a little bit of a timeline here. So the prep work I like to do, anywhere from like mid-November to mid-December, right? And this is where you're really prepping for your counts and planning your logistics. Then the second half of December, you can focus on your counts. And then by December 31st, we want to give your counts to your accountant and practice owner. So before I really start with this process, I really like to check with my accountant to find out exactly what they need, because I have noticed that different accountants will want different things. And so I always like to kind of check with them first. And then hopefully, right, your PIMS or other inventory software will have a report to help with this process.
And making sure that you're aligning to the products that they're looking for is going to be a key piece. So.
Mhm. Yeah. And a big one, because a lot of times, sometimes people have like equipment listed in their PIMS just to kind of like keep track of it. But equipment technically should not be included in your value of inventory in hand because it's technically an asset. And so that's why sometimes it's important. And some accountants, they want to see white goods. Some accountants don't. So that's why it's just important to clarify what these are. Okay.
Good time to
So,
point out the AHA chart of accounts, perhaps, do you?
yes. Um, The AHA chart of accounts, if you're not sure what should or shouldn't be included, the AHA chart of accounts is a really helpful resource that helps to kind of identify what's included in kind of our cost of goods, what's included in the value of inventory in hand, and then what might actually be technically an asset. Because I know sometimes there's, sometimes, some things can blur the lines between like equipment and inventory. So that could be a helpful resource to kind of help point that out. So before we kind of get started with prepping for our accounts, kind of we want to keep the ultimate end of goal of our accounts in mind. Hold on just one. Is ultimately kind of our goal is to have a grand total of the value of inventory in hand because this is used for tax preparation purposes. And so this is kind of what we are working towards. We want to know everything that's on hand, each of those items, the total quantity that you have on hand, and then the average cost. And so by doing this, we can kind of add up in sum to see that grand total of that value of inventory in hand. So not only is it helpful from a tax preparation perspective, but it's also helpful, as Emma already shared, to look and see where you kind of fall in those benchmarks to see like, oh, I might actually have a little too much on hand. So, and then finally, refer to your PIMS to kind of see, what this report would be. So, in Digitail, this is the stock movement report. Maybe if you use another software like Avamark, it's the inventory report. And if your software does not have a report, you'll have to compile one in Excel. So I'm crossing my fingers for you that you use a PIMS like Digitail that you can use the report in.
Okay.
So another great thing about doing end of year counts is you kind of start your new year off with a clean slate. It's definitely like, right, new year, new me. Same thing with our inventory. It's a really great time to make sure that you have everything, in the software, that you kind of have everything organized. It just feels so good to start off with like this clean slate.
Absolutely. I want to take a second too, just to reinforce this prepping process because it's December 9th. That one caught me off guard, but it's December 9th. It's already December 9th, but there's still a few weeks before we get to the end of the year. So this is a great time to do some of that prep work, clean up some of the waste, take care of expired products, organize things a little bit more, get prepared now to do that end of year count. It'll go so much smoother for you.
Yeah, so really the first thing that I like to do with kind of this prep process is print your inventory list. So print off this list and just kind of review all the products, right? Are there any that aren't listed? Or is there any that you don't carry anymore that you need to deactivate? Are there any products that are super wonky, right? If we look at like the quantity on hand and it says you have like 18 million mils of fluids or like 14,000, you know, 18 gauge needles, right? So we really kind of want to go through and review our inventory list now with a fine tooth comb to see if we need to make any adjustments or changes. So then when we get to our counts, none of that needs to be done, right? We can just get to counting the products that we have on the shelf. So it's much easier to fix these now rather than while you're counting, because I find that just people are like, where is this? I can't find this, right? And you haven't you haven't stocked it in the last 2 years. So then once you've kind of cleaned up your report, the next step is to really plan the logistics. Because once you've kind of reviewed your inventory report, you might have a much better idea of how much will need to be counted and the amount of time investment needed, right? So think about, will you be closed for your count? Who will be helping you? What information does your practice owner need? And then when will you be completing those counts? So, kind of some things I have found to be helpful is to actually close the practice for a few hours and have everyone in the practice count. As I shared before, my very first year that I did my count, we were open. And so I, counted by myself in between, pockets of time where, there wasn't a lot of patients, there wasn't a lot of, clients coming through the door. And so, but it just took a really long time. And I found the contrast between staying open and counting in between appointments versus closing down for a few hours and having everyone count, the difference was just huge. So that's why I really like to kind of close down and have everyone in the practice count. And that's also another reason where that prep work can be really helpful because if we prep for our counts, the downtime of when we need to be closed is much, much less because we're really intentionally just focused on those counts and nothing else. We don't need to do any kind of like, oh, where does this live? Oh, where does that live? Oh, wait, why isn't this in the software? I always also find it fun to like provide food or kind of make it a fun counting party. I know that like counting is really like the last thing that people want to do, but if we can bring a little bit of excitement, if we can bring a little bit of cheer to it, sometimes that helps just a little bit. The next thing is I before you count, as I always like sure to make sure any outstanding invoices or packing slips have been received into the software. We don't want any outstanding. So that's kind of another one of those prep things that you can do. Let's say, for example, on maybe like Friday, I don't even know what the 30th is, but let's just say Friday the 30th is when you're going to count. Then on Thursday, the 29th, I would make sure you receive any outstanding invoices and packing slips. I would make sure everything's in the software, do a final run through of your inventory report to see if anything needs to be adjusted. And then I would also run a report to see if you have any unposted transactions or medications that are waiting to be picked up and handle those. So again, right, we are doing all this prep work to make sure that when that count comes, we can just count and kind of get it done. Oh, yep. And then kind of once our counts arrive, right, and the day is here, right? It's Friday the 30th, we're doing our counts. I like to assign different categories for different team members. So, and I will assign them kind of based upon their personality or their skill set. If I have somebody who's like, my lead dental technician, I'm going to assign the dental category to her. If I have a lead surgery tech, I'm going to assign the surgery category to her. If I have somebody who's like really great attention to detail, they get to help me count tabs, pills, and liquids. But I find somebody who maybe doesn't have the greatest attention to detail, I might have them count something a little bit easier. So that's kind of where I'll assign different categories to different team members. And then one of the things that I actually found the most helpful is that me as the main person, I don't actually count. I have everyone else count, and then I'm available to answer questions. And as soon as those count sheets start coming in, I make those adjustments in the software. Because if you are also counting, then once the counting is done, now you have to spend hours making those adjustments. So I kind of like to coordinate so that my team is counting, I'm making adjustments. And then while those counts are happening, it's a really great time to check expiration dates, wipe down your shelves, make things are organized. And some of this, it might even be worth doing as prep work, right? We can go through now to see if there's any expired products. We can make sure that, things are organized. And then when you are adjusting and kind of entering those adjustments, I find it helpful to check the setup of an item, right? Check the quantity, maybe the buy sell ratio, just to make sure that, the item is set up appropriately. And this is also maybe a good time to add or check your reorder points. So Renee asks, if a client hasn't picked up, say, a bottle of 25 milligram Riverdale that is already labeled and waiting for pickup, has Digitail already pulled that bottle out of inventory, even if not sold, or would we have to include the bottle in the count? Rebecca said once the item is in the record, it will be pulled out of stock. Perfect. That makes it easy. Okay.
Thanks, Rebecca.
And then so when we are kind of counting and making those adjustments in the software, I always like to add a notes and reasons for that adjustment. So that if anyone is ever curious, like, oh, hey, like why was there this big quantity adjustment? What happened here? Then we have notes to refer back to make it easier. And kind of a little bit of a tip is you can just copy and paste that, the notes or the reason, so that you just paste it into every item. You don't have to like type it every time. So you could say like, oh, Um, Year-end count completed by NC on December 30th, let's just say. And then once you've completed your count, you've made all your adjustments, save as a PDF that the stock report, and then print another copy for safekeeping. Because typically your practice management system will only kind of give the value inventory in hand for that instance. You can't kind of refer back to it. So that's kind of why I like to just keep a record just in case I do need to refer back to it. And then the biggest thing is don't forget to celebrate yourself and everyone involved. Your year end counts is a huge, huge task. It's a huge thing. So just make sure to celebrate yourself and everyone who is involved.
As you'd said before, it's not everybody's favorite time and favorite
Yes,
activity. So worth celebrating, making sure everybody's rewarded, appreciated.
yes. So kind of your action plan for your end of year counts is review that report from Digitail. Review your organization to see if anything needs to be adjusted or if it's really clear where everything lives. Then think about what are your logistics. Answer the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and how for those inventory counts. Print your account sheets and then assign to team members if necessary.
Delegate, delegate, delegate.
Yes. If you're not closing, divide up the categories and decide when you'll count. Decide how your day of plan will go and convey that to the team. I always like to say, well, I think Brene Brown said it first, but clear is kind. So a lot of times, if we can set expectations, if we can set people up with a plan, they know what to expect, they know how the day's going to go. That can be helpful for your team. And then the final step is to count and then update all of your counts.
Print off those reports.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, so the very first, last piece that we're going to kind of dive into is organizing your inventory. This is one of my favorite things to do. I'm like, give me that unorganized space and like, let's dive in. So let's talk about it. So you're organizing your inventory, right? Once it arrives in the practice, there's really kind of two main goals when it comes to having everything organized. Number one is to help your team find what they need when they need it, and for you to know exactly what you have on hand. Let's say, for example, right, you have pill pockets, and maybe you have some stored in the treatment area. You have some stored in the supply closet. Some are up front at the front desk. You have some maybe in the back kennel area, and so they're stored all over the practice. Then when it comes to doing the end of year count, let's say somebody is counting pill pockets and maybe they only know that it's stored in the lobby and in the treatment area, but they don't know about those other places. Now you're going to have off counts and you're not going to have an accurate representation of the value of inventory on hand. Not only that, but you're going to get a lot more questions about, hey, Nicole, where's this? Where does this live? Where does this live? Where does that live? And so it just creates a lot more chaos. So looking at these different pictures, right? Could you easily find what you need? Could you easily tell what's running low, right? I mean, looking on the picture on the right, there is just like there's boxes and things stacked behind one another. You could like go down a whole rabbit hole. And so if you think about counting everything in this storage area, it would probably take a while because you got to figure out what's exactly there first. But not only that, from a patient care perspective, could you find what you needed if an emergency came in? So I was kind of like to compare and contrast these two little shows. If you remember, I don't even know if it's still on, like the American Picker show where they like used to go through people's old barns and stuff. It'd be like a little archaeology day. You have no idea what's there. But on the bottom is a picture of the home edit. So looking at the two pictures, what are the biggest differences, right? First is clarity. Items are not hidden behind one another in the bottom picture. You know exactly what's on the shelf. You know exactly how much you have, and you know exactly where to find it. And so labels can be really helpful to signal where an item's home is, any reorder information. And another thing, let's say, for example, maybe you have two different storage closets. You could have like a little sticker. Maybe you have a blue storage zone and you have a yellow storage zone. You can have a little sticker or a little color notation to say like, oh, Clavamox drops is stored in the yellow storage area. Then they go to the yellow storage area and then they can find Clavamox drops on the shelf with a cute little label. So it just really kind of helps to kind of cut down that chaos. Not only that, but there's also containers, right? There's containers, dividers, and structure to the items, right? Things are contained, they're not just like, hodgepodge all over the place.
Mhm.
So, thinking about your inventory project, right? You might have a lot of ideas of things that you want to do right now. But think about your inventory project. What is going to be the thing that moves the needle the most? Think about who does it involve? What specific tasks need to be completed? What can be delegated, how can it be measured, and then set a goal and a deadline. If I was, just kind of throwing some inspiration out there, I would probably start with running that inventory report to see what I have in the software, what my quantity on hand numbers look like right now, and just kind of get a sense of how much work is going to be involved in my end of year counts. And then probably once that's done and that's situated and that's kind of prepped, I would then move to the kind of the physical inventory in your practice, check for those expiration dates, see if anything needs to be rearranged and reorganized. And another thing that I like to do is you can also like kind of test your organization and do a little bit of a scavenger hunt. And so you can have like maybe 5 or 10 products, and then you can time your team members to see how long it takes them to find each of those things. And that might give you a good sense of kind of testing your organization to see if things need to be adjusted or moved around before those counts happen.
Make it fun. There you
Yes.
go. So thank you, Nicole, walking us through all those best practices, opportunities. Make it fun, celebrate your team, prep ahead of time. We love to talk about moving from reactive to proactive. A lot of what we've talked about today is that shift. But don't be in that stressful space of always trying to react to things. Let's get ahead of it. Again, this is a great time of year to make sure that we can pull some of that together and really launch 2026 very well. Nicole and I are here to help. Courtney's on our team, so sorry about that. Nicole and I are here to help, and so is the rest of the team, including Courtney, to really try to bring this in line, make it something that you can lean into, not just this big onerous task that you have to try to accomplish. As we talked about in the beginning, Nicole has Inventory Management for Veterinary Professionals, a book that guides you through. I have it right here. It's blurred out, but always right at the tip of my fingertips. Great insights, great guidance on being able to get your hands and around inventory. Also, self-paced training, some remote inventory consulting, Inventory Nation podcast would be really good to lean in and just get really knowledgeable. And Nicole and I have partnered to bring Inventory Ally to the market as well. It's a system that takes order history, sales history, cycle counts. It calculates mins and maxes, ABC analysis, a lot of things just to optimize your inventory for you as a tool. It's integrated with Digitail. We're great partners. So helping you leverage a lot of the solutions that we talked about today. Really, again, get everything under control. As Mike mentioned in the very beginning, cost of goods sold is the second largest expense in your P&L. We've covered cost of carry. There's a lot of excess that can usually be kind of fine-tuned and add a lot of value both in time and money to your practice.
And
Great
one thing that I'll
results,
add really quick,
please.
we also have a completely free and ad-free pill counting app. So it's available in the App Store. It's a pill counting app, because sometimes, you download the pill counting apps and you only get like 20 free ones, or like there's a bazillion ads. We have one, it's completely free, it's completely ad-free, and you can use it to help with your cycle counts and year-end counts to make them that much faster. Few tips for using those is just make sure it's on like a high, like a matte surface. So don't use
Mhm.
like the reflective exam room tables. Try to have kind of like a matte background, and that can kind of help make them a bit more accurate.
Thanks for calling that out. Yeah, we launched that earlier this year, just really for this time of year. Make that a lot easier. And yeah, you don't get charged for it. No marketing in there. It's just a tool for you to count your pills. And there's even a report that you can print at the end of it. So good stuff. Hey, this wraps it up. We're still available. We're going to hang out for a little while for Q&A. As Nicole said in the beginning, no questions left behind. Anything we talked about today or anything else that we can help with, please start to put them into the chat. You can see on the screen here too a QR code if you want to learn anything more about what Inventory Ally Veterinary Care Logistics has to offer. Please check us out.
Yeah, absolutely. Tina asks, is it possible links or a list of all the extra stuff, podcast, book, app, etc.? I missed a few of the names. Yes, absolutely. We could, yeah, I think we could put together kind of like a summary of important things, and we could send it out to all the attendees if that works, Mike.
Of course, yeah, we'll make sure to send it out right after this.
Perfect. Yeah, what other questions do you have? It can be about inventory in general. It could be about anything we talked about today.
Nicole's favorite way of shaking the bottle so you hear exactly what's inside. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So I
Mhm.
like, yeah. So
Right.
if you ever heard my story before, my only training when I just got started with inventory was when you shake a bottle and it feels low, you order it. So that's kind of where I started. So if inventory is a struggle for you, and sometimes I feel like it can be like trying to put an octopus back in a box, right? Trying to get all eight tentacles in there, and then all of a sudden another one pops out. So I totally get it. If inventory is a struggle for you, it's a struggle for many. And
Gonna
so
ask, yeah, the name of the counting app. You can search. It's a Android and Apple App Store. Search for Inventory Ally. Probably be the easiest way to see it at the top of the list. You can search for a pill counting app. It'll have
yeah,
it'll have this little Inventory Ally logo associated with it.
yeah, the full name, at least Apple, is Pill Counter by Inventory Ally. So
Shannon says, "How do you keep accurate inventory of surgical supplies, fluids, ISO, needles, injectables?"
Yes, that is a really great question. So for any hospital supplies or consumables, typically what I like to do is I like to keep it in there as like per package, right? So we're not keeping track of individual syringes and needles. We're not keeping track of any of that. So injectables, okay, I'm going to start with injectables first because injectables are a little bit different. So how I like to keep track of injectables is typically I'll like to have kind of like a pre-med administration package set up that has all of the different options linked. And then people can say, like, oh, I use zero point 0.3 of dextromethorphan, I use zero point 0.3 of this, zero point 0.3 of that, and then it pulls it up at inventory for you. So for all of your injectables, I like it to track it per mill. And so typically for anything that's sold, um, or used in that way. So all of their pharmaceuticals, injectables, I like to enter into the software as the lowest unit that you sell them. So then for any like supplies or things like that, that's where I like to do by the package. So box of needles, box of syringes. For ISO, I'll just do like a bottle of ISO. And then what happens is rather than, because we're not selling those to clients, so those we need to make an adjustment. So you can, some people, it kind of depends on how your inventory is set up. There are some practices where if somebody opens a box of something, gets written on a list, and that adjustment gets made immediately. Some maybe they just don't make any adjustments and they just kind of like zero it out at the end of each month. It just kind of depends on your practice and how you have it set up right now. But those are kind of two different ways, right? Injectables, because we sell those and we administer them, we want to track those by per mill, so that we know how much we're selling, we know how much we're administering to our patients. So hopefully kind of that answers your question there. And then Jennifer said, we switched pins this year and everything is still messy. What do you see as priority number one in my case? Really great question. So um, I would probably start with all of your big categories, right? So your vaccines, your injectables, your flea, tick, and heartworm prevention, And so there are kind of two ways that you can do this. You can either start by doing that category, or every time you place an order, go in and clean up each of those items that were on that order, so that, kind of your most ordered items get adjusted and kind of um, cleaned up more quickly. So that's probably how that I would do it, but I would try to kind of similar to cycle counting, as I would focus on those high value, high impact items first.
A couple of thoughts I'll offer to these questions too. Start with that last one is the way Inventory Ally would tackle it is it's going to look at your order history. So you can look at from your suppliers, or if you use Vetcove, you can go to the order history report and see a total. Um, we stack rank your products based on the total volume and the total cost of products over the last 12 months. And that's how we put together that ABC analysis. So that's a great way to start to the top, Nicole had mentioned the top 20%, and that type of a list can be where you start your focus. Apply cycle counts to that, and you start to get a rhythm of that. You can add a few more products, but that makes it very specific to your demand, your operations in the hospital as well. Um,
Shane asked,
Go ahead.
is Inventory Alley or Vetcove available in Canada? So Vetcove is not available in Canada. And then,
Inventory
and
Ally.
also,
Yeah, Inventory Ally is currently available in British Columbia. We've partnered with AVP. WDDC, that integration is actually coming online first part of the year. So that'll extend kind of this western half of Canada because we need to be able to work with the distributors. But CDMV and BPCL are both in conversations with us about starting an integration as well. So you should see Inventory Ally throughout Canada before the mid uh, first in the first half of next year, but already live with ABP in British Columbia.
yes, absolutely. Okay, Shannon said, I'm having trouble with euthanasia drugs because we check out the clients before we get the animal back. I have the euthanasia drugs linked, but it's a set quantity. Would the best thing to do would have the staff do a $0 invoice after the doctor decides drug amounts? So a couple things that you can do here is, rather than like check the client out, you could charge them and like basically put like a deposit or a credit on the account, and then them out after they leave and then mail them the receipt. So that can work. That's kind of a few extra steps. But yeah, you could have basically like a $0, like, basically like euthanasia drug logging code, that you can use after the fact to kind of set those quantities and log the drugs. Um, so that's, kind of how that you could do that there. Jennifer asked, does Inventory Alley integrate with EasyVet? Yep, we sure do. So there is an integration there. And then Mike said, confirming that every attendee will be receiving CE certificate by the end of the week and will be delivered to the email you registered with.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If not, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. We really appreciate it. It's always so much fun, and I love our events together. So thank you, thank you, thank you for attending. We love it. We had so much fun. And yeah, we just appreciate your time. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.